Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the BCP Planning Committee. I'm going to start by asking the officers to introduce themselves because they haven't got nameplates because we're...
Hello, my name is Paul Clough. I'm a solicitor working for the Council's legal department. Oh, sorry.
Afternoon, I'm Richard Genge from the BCP Planning Unit.
I am David Hodges. I'm team leader for the Christchurch area in the development management section.
My name is Joseph Tyler. I'm a Democratic Officer in the Democratic Services Department.
And I'll ask Mr. Tyler to take us through the first items on the agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to start with a brief housekeeping notice. So please note that this meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for subsequent public broadcast. The meeting may also be audio recorded or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Please could I remind members and officers to use their microphones when speaking. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests, so if the alarm does go off, please leave through the emergency exit at the back of the room and assemble at the front of the building by the public toilets. Please could I remind everybody in the room if they could turn their mobile phones off or to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you very much. So that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Tony O'Neill, Councillor Tony Trent and Councillor Lawrence Fear. Item 2 is substitute members. We have received notification from the nominated representative of the Conservative Group Leader that Councillor Brian Dion will substitute for Councillor Tony O'Neill. And likewise, we have also received notification from the Liberal Democrat Group Leader that Councillor Mike Brooke will substitute for Councillor Tony Trent. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of pecuniary interest to make on the items before them? Councillor Hall.
Yes, I've got several interests to declare. First of all, on number 20, which is A on the agenda, I have a family that live in Portfield Road, but it's far away enough so it won't have any effect on the application, but I should declare that. Also, the second application on the agenda is for my own property, and I would like to be able to speak for that, and so I declare that as well. And I should obviously leave the meeting as soon as the debate, or as it says on the instructions from Richard Jones, that I should leave the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Are there any other declarations to be made? Okay, that brings us to item 4, public issues. We have received several requests to speak from members of the public and from a ward councillor. With members' agreement, we will hear these as and when. So, are members in agreement? Thank you very much. That takes us to item 5. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Item 5 is 20 Grove Road. Do we have an officer to talk to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I will present David Hodges. As members can see, this is a planning application for full planning permission for a single dwelling house on land to the rear of 20 Grove Road East in Christchurch. I'm not going to rehearse all of the issues addressed in the report, Chairman, but to take you through some slides showing the key plans, photos, elevations, to amplify and clarify issues that are raised in the report and which members may wish to ask questions on afterwards. So the site is an existing semi-detached property on Grove Road East. Hopefully you can see clearly the my cursor there and the red line plan. So you can see a narrow thin plot, and to the south of the site, Portfield Close. Whilst we, as a new authority, are getting to grips with a larger area, I thought I'd just put this slide in to give a bit of context for the site. So the application site is here, and just to help get people's bearings, Christchurch Station is there. The Saxon Square and Waitrose at the top of the town centre is in that bottom right of the slide. Barrack Road Retail Park here, Iford Bridge off that way, Tuckton Bridge off that way, set between the two rivers. So here's an aerial photo of the site, Chairman. As you can see, this application property is here, and the proposed application site is part of the rear garden and then accessed from Portfield Close to the south. And just for members bearing with the reference to the property at the rear of number 16 Grove Road, the dwelling that's been created is this property here and its parking area here. So this is the existing dwelling at number 20, and no alterations are proposed to this property. This is the existing garage at the rear of the site, and this will be demolished to make way for the proposed development. So going round to the proposed plans, the intention is to subdivide the plot pretty much in half with the intention of retaining 10-metre gardens either side for the existing property and for the new proposed dwelling. And this is showing the layout where the proposed dwelling will go. So fronted onto the end of Portfield Close with its access and parking from there, and rear gardens up to this point here, and the remainder left for the property at number 20. These are the proposed designs, a simple modest 2-bed property with pitch roof in render and fibre cement roof slates. Just a point of clarification on this rear elevation that faces back up towards number 20, and whilst there's 2 windows in there, that serves a single bedroom, as you're about to see on the floor plan. So that's that room there, and then that would be the front of the property, and showing the fairly conventional layout of the proposed dwelling. Just to give you a flavour of the characters of the area, so this is the view up from Portfield Close, and the dwelling in effect is sited on the end of the close here. Access over this land here, you'll see this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but the existing access to the rear garage is in this area here, and this to the right is the more recent property approved conversion of an existing building at the rear of number 16 Grove Road East. And just to give you a flavour of the character in Grove Road East, to show you the type and form of character that we have in that street currently, although the proposals will not be readily visible from this particular location. Just up in a little more detail on the site, so access in effect where this black vehicle is here, the garage, existing garage, you can just see off to the side there, and then this is a property which will be demolished to make way for the new dwelling house, and in effect you should be able to see that very little of the new dwelling would be visible from Grove Road East. Just going back to the proposed elevations and layout. So, Chair, you'll see in the report we've worked through the proposed merits of the scheme, for and against, taken note of the comments received during the consultation process. As an update, we have now received a unilateral undertaking from the applicant. We haven't confirmed with legal services if that is sufficient. So whilst we've received that, the recommendation remains as on the report, which is to delegate to the head of planning to approve, subject to the completion of that satisfactory undertaking. But subject to that, Chairman, the application is recommended for approval.
Lovely, thank you. Do we have anyone speaking?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Chairman. So we have a public statement from a local resident, Carol Cronshaw, speaking in objection to the application.
Mrs. Cronshaw, you have 5 minutes to speak, and can I ask everyone to allow her to speak without interruption?
Committee members, this proposal is introducing a 2-storey built form into an area of mostly open garden with a small outbuilding which has no visual or other impact. This dwelling will be visible from all the gardens of Grove Road East, which currently have an open and unobscured aspect. Such a dwelling would be totally out of keeping with the open character of the area and erode the spacious nature it currently enjoys. It is generally the case that dwellings built on garden plots to the rear of existing properties are modest, single-storey properties to avoid that visual impact and to ensure that there is no impact on adjoining residential properties, which brings me to my main issues. Members, what is proposed here is a blank 2-storey wall adjoining what is currently open garden, and to say that this does not represent overbearing and oppressive development is an astounding assessment. This flank of the house will result in a complete loss of outlook to this element of garden and be oppressive and dominant. The building will stand some 4.5 metres to its eaves and is 30 centimetres from the boundary to neighbours of 18 Grove Road East and 41 Portfield Close. There is no 42A. This will amount to significant harm to our amenities. The resident of 18 Grove Road East works from home 3 days a week at an office which will only be 3.5 metres from the wall. The driveways adjacent to the build will be compromised. Both neighbours use this area to take children to and from school and at other times of the day. This brings into question the health and safety of the site. It is only 6 metres away from 41 Portfield Close that has a glazed door, which is the only source of light from this elevation. Your officers suggest that there will be no overlooking. However, there will be bedroom windows directly overlooking the gardens at the rear of the house. The officer says because there is already mutual overlooking, that increasing overlooking is acceptable. At present, the degree of mutual overlooking is acceptable from other properties either side, but still allows privacy at the area immediately to the rear of the houses in Grove Road East and the first element of the gardens. Placing windows directly facing the rear of number 18 removes that element of privacy that we currently consider precious. The upstairs windows of the build will be just under 14 metres from the conservatory of Grove Road East. Surely there is a minimum requirement that overlooking may be avoided. Portfield Close has 2 lines of terraced houses that give a sense of enclosure to the close. The only relief is a sense of openness formed by the 3 narrow gardens at the end of the close. The excessive bulk and height of the development creates a substantial negative visual impact on Portfield Close. The proposal to render the property, which against the backdrop of Edwardian brick-built houses of Grove Road East, will stand out like a sore thumb. This is wholly out of character with the pattern of development within the street scene. There is a need for good quality housing which will enhance the area. I would suggest that this development significantly detracts from this. I therefore suggest that it is against policy HE2 and HE12. Grove Road East consists of predominantly semi-detached properties, with most having no off-road parking, and the proposal will result in the loss of 3 parking spaces. All other development within the area have provided 1 off-road parking for the existing and 1 for the new build. With the loss of off-road parking provision for 20 Grove Road East, this will put further pressure on parking along this road. The majority of properties in Portfield Close have frontages that have off-road parking for 1 car. The development does provide for 1 off-road parking space. There are only 13 on-road parking spaces for 42 houses in Portfield Close, making parking for 2 cars and visitors impossible. I would question 5 of the officer's report and suggest that this is impossible to police. In conclusion, members, good planning is about good neighbourliness, and this proposal is not a good neighbour and breaches all the basic principles of what is considered acceptable in planning terms. The impact and harm is to an unacceptable degree, and we would ask members to refuse this application. Need for new housing is not a sufficient material consideration to outweigh the real and significant harm for this proposal will cause. Thank you for your time today.
Now we have
Good afternoon, committee. Okay, so the principle of the development. The proposed development would make a valuable contribution, we feel, to addressing the current lack of housing supply, and the core strategy policies do not include a policy to assist development of residential gardens. The location of the site lends itself to infill residential development, and it is situated onto an open-end close with the road, the access and a drop curb already in existence. The impact on character and surrounding area. Other developments have taken place in a similar format. For example, number 16 Grove Road East has also been severed their land to allow for new development. This has worked well and has already set a precedent. Exterior materials and features have been carefully considered to complement the character of the surrounding properties on Portfield Close. This was ensured through discussions with the planning officer following the pre-app. The scale and impact of our proposal would not look out of place in this area of Portfield Close and would in fact enhance the overall integrity of the existing street scene. We aim to keep an open driveway similar to adjacent properties, but introduce planting to soften the overall appearance. We aim to aesthetically improve this end of Portfield Close that currently appears uneven and unfinished. Impact on residential amenity. Residential amenities of surrounding dwellings won't be affected by noise, disturbance, loss of light or privacy. All required distances to other properties have been checked throughout the design process and do not encroach on any neighbour's privacy or right of light. The position of the proposed building was carefully set out to ensure this. We aim to protect the privacy of neighbouring occupants and the relationship between the new property and existing properties. Onto parking provision. We have shown the adequate number of parking spaces for the unit size, together with cycle and refuse facilities. There is already an existing access, driveway and garage to the rear of 20 Grove Road East, which fronts Portfield Close. The proposed development would only replace what is already there, maintaining existing access and driveway. There aren't any existing parking spaces in this location at present, and if so, as has often been the case, they would then be blocking the access. Parking has been approved by Highways and the required number of spaces have been allocated for the two-bed dwelling. Landscaping and amenity space. We are proposing to divide number 20's overly large neglected garden with wasted amenity area into two flourishing garden spaces for two properties. Soft planting will be added to the front of the property to soften aesthetically. And then advice given by the planning officer in these consultations. We did reduce the scale from a 2.5 storey to 2 stories. We showed a more traditional roof with a shallower pitch. We repositioned the dwelling in order to demonstrate a minimum back-to-back separation from the rear of the new dwelling of approximately 20 metres, and consideration into protecting the privacy of neighbouring properties. We have taken all the previous comments on board and amended the drawings accordingly to allow for development that is more sympathetic in design and layout to the surrounding properties on Portfield Close, in terms of character, scale and materials. All are very much in keeping. We agreed the parking was acceptable for a two-bed property. We believe we have now applied everything discussed and hope for a positive outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Ward Councillor Mike Cox, you want to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here to speak on behalf of the residents and the community of Christchurch Town, but specifically those in Portfield Close and Grove Road East. The proposal you have before you is to build a 2-storey house in the back garden of number 20 Grove Road East, with an entrance onto Portfield Close, which will have a significant and detrimental effect on the immediate neighbours and the street scene of Portfield Close. The houses in Portfield Close are different from most of the others in that area, being tightly packed into a relatively narrow close. The existing parking in this road is already difficult and at times impossible. The officer's report correctly identifies that there has been back garden developments in this area, but it has been exclusively bungalows, which do not cause a significant overlooking onto neighbours' properties and also they exit onto relatively wide roads. In recommending this development, the officer has relied on the need for housing trumping all other concerns. This is simply not acceptable. and cannot be used as a basis for any development, let alone an infill and a back garden development. The high walls will cause significant visual impact and a real loss of amenity for the immediate neighbours. The houses at number 41 Portfield Close, not number 42A as seen on the map, which is incidentally a historic building, has been there for many years before most of those houses, and number 18 Grove Road East will have living spaces which will be facing a brick-stroke rendered wall. The building is out of character with either those on Grove Road East or those on Portfield Close, and in terms of Portfield Close will destroy the open and spacious end of the close. The report you have before you contains a number of important and significant errors which residents have already noted and which I will not repeat, but it's important to the lives of the local residents that when proposals like this come before you, that the reports are accurate and that there are full facts before you. I for instance, considered it a shame that there was no photos in the officers' reports, although you've had them today, which Google Maps will not, with Google Maps will not be difficult. I strongly recommend that the members read the report by Ken Clark, the planning consultant, who sets out the situation very fairly, and I would reiterate the conclusions as follows. Number one, the two-storey property will cause harm to its neighbours' amenity by being overbearing and overlooking, contrary to HE2 of the Christchurch core strategy. The proposed property will worsen an already difficult parking situation in Portfield Close and will be in breach of the Bournemouth Pool and Dorset parking standards and does not comply with the Council's adopted policy of KS12 of the Christchurch core strategy. The development is harmful to the character of the area, both that of the rear aspect of Grove Road East and the destruction of the open aspect of Portfield Close, and is again in breach of HE2 of the Christchurch core strategy. Mr. Chairman and members, I am passionate that there is a need for housing in this area, but it must be good quality housing, and it cannot be built with the wanton neglect of the impact on their neighbours. This development is against policies HE2 and HE12 of the Christchurch and East Dorset core strategies, and therefore I would ask you to refuse it.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Okay, councillors. Councillor Hall, would you like to say anything? This is your ward, is it?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chairman. Well, again, as it's already pointed out, it is an overdevelopment in my opinion. Also, what I would like to ask, Chairman, on this report, on page 10, you've got condition 7. Please could the officer tell me where condition 7 is, because I can't find it, unless I'm missing it somewhere.
Bear with me, Chairman. I'm just checking on the report. There's no...
on page 10.
Page 10. Paragraph 34. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Apologies for that. When the report was put through, the case officer considered whether we should remove permitted development rights for openings in the side of the property. Just for clarification, under the permitted development rights, no openings can be put into the side above first floor level, which are clear glazed. So any opening on these side elevations would need to be obscure glazed unless it was a high level window, 1.7 metres above. And any new openings on the ground floor level would be screened by the proposed boundary fences, which is covered by condition 6. So in that instance, the condition would be superfluous because in effect we have control anyway. So the government guidance is fairly clear on where we should remove PD rights, and they advise us in the National Planning Practice Guidance, so that should be the exception, not the rule. And so where we have that control, we would not seek to impose that condition because, in effect, it would come before us anyway if someone wanted to put a clear glazed window in.
Thank you, Chairman. But again, I do think the report should be very clear and precise. When you've got the condition and it's not there, it doesn't make sense to me. And the other thing that does really concern me is the parking. In Portfield Close, it is a nightmare to find a parking space. I've tried on many occasions living locally, and it's not sufficient for them. Or in Grove Road East, so it is very difficult, and I think that should be taken into consideration because people do have cars and they do need to park them near their properties. So I think the objectors have made a very pointed and accurate description of the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question on section 32. It's about the separation gap between the properties of 0.3, so 30 centimetres. Is that standard? Because it doesn't seem enough to dig foundations without disturbing the neighbours' fencing or foundations. Thank you.
Chairman, in effect, under the planning permission, the applicant can propose to build where they like. Whether they've got a legal right to do that is a separate matter. And where they are close to the boundary, they will need to comply with the requirements under the Party Wall Act. But that's not a determining factor for the merits of the planning application. That's a separate hurdle they need to go through with the owner of the adjoining property, in much the same way that they will have to go through building regs approval if they get a planning consent. So there isn't a set separation distance from the boundary that maybe have been done just in pragmatic terms in for that way. But the issue is whether that proximity to the boundary in effect is harmful and breaches some of the planning conditions and the policies that you've had referred to by the report and the objectors.
I've got a few questions I'd like to ask. Could we go back to the slide of Portfield, the close-up one? There was one a bit closer than that, I think. Yes, I think that's the one. Actually, I've got three questions, really. One, the car that's parked there, the dark-coloured one, is that parked in a normal space? Because if so, that appears to be completely blocking the access to the proposed site. So that's question one.
Do you want me to take the answers in order or say all
I think so, because they're separate issues.
Yes, our best endeavours to investigate the position is that the public highway includes all of that area there. So in effect, it extends up to the red line boundary. So in effect, that pavement area is part of the maintained public highway. So there is no, our understanding is the legal position is there's no legal right to park on that land. You have a right to pass and repass over that area in order to get to that parking area.
Okay, thank you. The next two probably do go together more, so maybe it would be better if you do answer them together. One is the house that may or may not be 42A. There seems to be some dispute of that.
Chairman, we're reliant on this is taken from the Ordnance Survey, so these details we have from the Ordnance Survey. So if it's an error in the numbering, it's not coming from us, it's coming from the Ordnance Survey.
That wasn't my question.
Oh, sorry.
It was just reference to the particular building. That was an existing building that was adapted. What alterations were made to that building? That's question one. But the other question is the relative heights of the proposed house as compared with 42A and the rest of Portfield, the immediate houses on either side of Portfield Close.
Chairman, my understanding of the history is the 42A, for want of a better description, Yes, an existing building that was converted and planning permission was won on appeal. My understanding is it is a two-storey property. There's an upstairs in the property, but its aspect is looking north, looking that way. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Well, the relative
The relative height. Sorry, yes, my apologies. We don't have a street scene. In terms of relative height, it would be lower than the converted property because that's got a very shallow pitch, as you can see in there. It would not be taller than the Portfield Road properties, which have a relatively tall pitch.
Right, but you can't be specific.
I can't be specific, Chairman.
Right,
Apologies.
Mr. Chairman, can I answer that question? I live at number 41. Is that
Do you know the exact height of
the height of 41 Portfield Place was kept very low to be in keeping with the neighbours, but we were restricted because it was a building that was there in the 1900s before Portfield Place was built.
You don't know the exact height, though. Okay, lovely, thank you. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you. Just a question. Could you go back to the site plan, the site layout? I just wanted to confirm. Paragraph 33 of the report says a property 20 has just been given planning permission for a two-storey building. Are we talking about the neighbouring property? Is that what that has planning permission for a two-storey building in the garden?
Sorry, apologies. Can I?
Paragraph 33 of the report. It is noted that consent was recently granted for a plot severance and formation of a detached dwelling in what was originally an existing garden but building at the rear site at number 18 Grade Road East. Is that next door neighbour?
That is this property here. So
That's not 18. That's not 18.
I'm not sure you're right because it says quite clearly that it's number 18 Grade Road East next to number 20 Grade Road East.
Chair, just for clarity, the parking area here is to the rear of 18 and is part of this property's curtilage. So if I just take you to the, actually I might show you on the aerial view, maybe quickest. So that area there is the parking area for that property. So it's part of the rear of 18, it's part of the rear of number 20.
So where is the two-storey building in 18 going? Which got planning permission?
No, that is it's this building. Yes, that's the planning permission it's being referred to.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Question on the parking standard. There's been no adverse report from the Highways Department, but my question is, does this proposed development comply with the SPD for parking standards?
Yes, Chairman. This is one of the issues which is going to be different depending on which former local authority area we're in. The Christchurch core strategy is attached to the policy case, rather is attached to the former Dorset County Council parking guidelines, and I understand that the former Poole and Bournemouth areas have different parking guidance. So we're in this part of, as far as the development plan is concerned for this area, we are needing to refer to the former DCC guidance. So in that particular document, there's a table at 3.1.3, which is developments for 5 dwellings or less. And what it says is parking provision for 5 dwellings or less, number of bedrooms 2 in this case, parking spaces 1 or 2. So we are guided by the Highways Authority as to whether it's a case that they think it would be one that it needs the additional parking space, or whether it's satisfactory for it to have the single parking space as shown in the guidance. So where the guidance has that flexibility, we're guided by the Highways Authority as to whether it's a case where they want more parking, but in this instance they didn't object. So from our perspective, it's compliant with the adopted guidance.
can I just follow through on that? But there is an overall, there's a loss to the parking area for the house, so there actually is no additional parking being provided because it's taking a parking space that's already there.
Chairman, yes, we accept that, and we've acknowledged that in the report, and we acknowledge that as a negative, and we've balanced that against what we consider to be the positives of the scheme. And in this particular instance, the lack of or in fact what's best described as a loss of parking for number 20, the harm arising from that is not in this instance, in our professional view, sufficient to override the merits of the scheme.
Chair, I've got a couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's right.
The back-to-back distance between the properties, I assume there's a design guide that will specify precisely what that minimum distance should be. It's been, I think the developer has suggested it's a 20 metre separation, back-to-back separation distance, but less if you take the dimension from the conservatory or the building that's on the back of the existing house. Could you just tell us what the design guide actually requires for that back-to-back separation distance?
And so, Chairman, within this particular area, the core strategy or existing plans don't specify a minimum window-to-window distance. 20 metres would normally be a very satisfactory distance to require adequate amenity and privacy for properties where you have a window-to-window distance. In the report, you'll see we've accepted that distance is slightly below because of this in relation to number 18, because of the conservatory coming down here, and we acknowledge that it's 17 metres, that particular distance from a slightly oblique angle from the proposed first floor bedroom across there. These things are something we have to consider on their merits, and in this particular instance we're satisfied that's a sufficient distance to maintain adequate privacy because we don't have a specific figure in the adopted guidance or policies for the Christchurch area which would count against that.
Councillor Stripley.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question first. What is the purpose of the recommended subject to a 106 agreement?
Thank you, Chairman. So the legal agreement is to secure a financial contribution towards Heathland's strategic access management. I've forgotten what the other M is now. SA and double M. So monitoring thing. So this is mitigation for the impact of further development within 400 metres, 5 kilometres of Heathland, and their active management through wardening, and because of the advice we're given by Natural England about the impacts of further restoration on the Heathlands.
Thank you. So it's a pretty standard condition for this area?
Yes, in fact it's going to apply pretty much uniformly across BCP, yes.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Should I make a comment now, or are we still on questions?
Councillor Hall.
May I ask a question? Of course, it's on parking, if I may. The officer said that there's a parking space, but recently at a last planning meeting we had at Christchurch, the officer came up with a 5 metre by 3 metre space was standard. Normally I thought it was 2.8 or 2.4 by 4.8. I'd like to know what size he's talking about, please.
Chairman, thank you. The Highways Authority haven't advised us that the space is substandard. The requirements in the guidelines has enlarged what used to be a standard parking space, and the reasons for that are simply related to the fact that our cars are rather larger than when the traditional guidance was adopted a number of years ago. So that's simply to reflect the growing size of cars. But we are guided by the Highways Authority as to whether a space is substandard, and in this instance they haven't objected to that aspect.
Thank you.
Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. We heard from the objectors earlier about the fact that the majority of infill development in that area is bungalows. Could the planning officer please tell us just how many of them are actually bungalows compared to those that are two-storey, please?
Chairman, the short answer to that is no, because I'd need to have some concept of the area we were considering in order to answer that sort of authoritatively. Within the immediate context, the only comparable infill site is the one to the east, which is a conversion of the building and is two-storey. We, under the policies in the core strategy, it's not a requirement for a backland plot to simply be a bungalow each time. It needs to be judged on its merits as to whether there's a harm. If there's a harm from overlooking as a result of a two-storey property, then the scheme needs to be judged against policy HE2 about whether it has an unacceptable impact on neighbours' living conditions.
Councillor Stripley.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, having heard a lot of comments, I've listened in some disbelief to actually some of them, because not knowing the area very well, I have visited Grove Road today and looked at this plot quite carefully from the end. It already has an access and a garage on it, and a very tatty hedge, I might say. Number 41 adjacent has no windows at all facing the development, and the adjacent gardens are pretty overgrown, sheds and things you can see from the side. Certainly not an area I would consider a spacious view. Also, there is simply no right to a view across your neighbour's garden. You can go out and put up a 2-metre fence along all your rear boundaries, if you so wish, and that is standard. So I think the argument about views across is pretty irrelevant. There was a comment about this is proposed to be a rendered property. Well, all the properties in Portfield Close, barring, I think, 41 at the end, or 42A, whichever it's called, are rendered properties. Most of them have one off-road parking space, which this property is proposed to have. And actually, when you buy a property, you own the property, you do not own the road or the highway outside, and therefore it is something of a privilege if you are able to park outside your own property. It's certainly not a right. One of the properties in Grove Road actually had 2 large black wheelie bins sitting in the road outside their property to make sure they could park when they got back tonight, presumably. And that I thought was quite an outrageous thing to do, but it does imply how difficult it might be to park at times in that road. But somebody's very happy to block off a parking space with wheelie bins. The access is across a footway, so again, like all the properties, you have a right to pass and repass. I can't see any planning reasons to refuse it. So I'm entirely happy with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Stripley. Any other comments or questions from members? Councillor Bartlett.
I don't share my colleague's view on this, I'm afraid. I think to actually claim that the parking requirements are being met, I think is absurd, given that one parking space has been taken away from the other that normally uses it. So I don't think an extra parking provision has been made for this development. I also think that having a 2-storey building there will actually be overbearing for the existing neighbours, and it will cause harm to the visual amenity that they currently enjoy. So I also think that it will look rather strange being in the middle at the end of the close there. So I think it is actually incongruous in the street scene. And I have to say, I haven't read Ken Clark's report in absolute detail. I agree with just about everything he said in it. So I personally couldn't support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Bartlett The thing what struck me when I first went up Portfield Close was going towards the end, it was all open. You could see the backs of Grove Road East properties, which are brick. Yes, Portfield Close is rendered, but you can see the Grove Road are brick, and it's the character and bulk. I think that you would be struck by a white rendered building at the end of a road where now it is all open, so it's definitely out of character. Thank you.
Is that everyone else? Anybody else want to say anything on this? No, Councillor Stribley.
I would only add the comment regarding Grove Road. Very few of the properties in Grove Road have any rear access or car parking. This is an exception because it backs onto Portfield Close. Those properties were built when people didn't have cars, so they don't have parking spaces, and they're fairly close to the frontage, and that is standard for virtually all the neighbouring properties in Grove Road.
So clarity, most of Grove Road don't have their own parking on the
Yes, that's correct, Chairman. There's some later properties later infill, but the majority of those Edwardian and the earliest properties in the street don't have the benefit of off-road parking.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
I think it sounds as if we've come to the end of the debate on this, and I'd like to move to refuse the application.
Councillor Brooke.
If I may, Chair, very briefly, I do have a number of concerns about the quality of the design and the loss of the parking provision. What concerns me is if we were to refuse this, what's likely to happen on appeal, and what is the position with regard to the tilted balance because of the age of the Christchurch core strategy.
Yes, I best, Chairman. Yes, the currently published position is that the housing land supply is below 5-year level, and whilst that is based on the entire plan area, and I'm going to try and keep this as straightforward as I can, which includes Christchurch and the East Dorset area, but as a monitoring and an assessment exercise, in terms of crunching those particular numbers, we are below the 5 years. So that does alter the weight that can be attached to the policies, and so in refusing an application we need to be able to demonstrate that the harm that flows from the scheme demonstrably outweighs any benefits of trying to readdress that shortfall by approving a dwelling. Now, the approval of a dwelling will only make a very small contribution towards that, but nonetheless, it's a step in the right direction in terms of trying to address that particular shortfall. And we need to show that there's clear and overriding reasons related to our policies that outweigh that balance in favour of approval, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just following on from that comment that you've made there, just how long is it that Christchurch has not been able to reach their housing targets?
Chairman, my understanding is that's fairly recent from our most recent set of monitoring, and that's the figures that are published on the website. There will need to be an exercise, as I understand it, and Mr. Gens will correct me if I'm wrong, that the housing land supply and delivery needs to now be assessed across the whole of the BCP area. So that, in effect, we're getting a clear picture of housing delivery across the piece. It may be that produces a different figure, because I understand at this point in time that certain of the preceding authorities could demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. Is that correct in relation to Poole?
Yes.
Yeah. But could not in relation to Bournemouth. So in effect, that exercise needs to be done by our policy colleagues. What we do need to do, unfortunately, at this point in time is determine the application against the plan that we have for this particular area. We're in an unusual situation and striking new ground. But for the purposes of the decision today, yes, we do need to accept that the Christchurch local plan area is below that 5-year figure, Chairman.
Councillor Bartlett.
I think when we start trying to second guess what the appeal inspector might or might not do on an appeal, I think we're getting into difficult territory there. I think we need to make decisions based on material planning issues, and I think we've heard of several material planning issues here that cause us to refuse this application in terms of the overbearing and dominant nature of the proposal, the breach in parking, and the loss of visual amenity to the neighbours, and the incongruous nature of the development in the street scene. So I don't change my view, and I believe that I still maintain that we should refuse. So I maintain my move to refuse the application.
Do we have a seconder for that move? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would second that. I would also confirm, which was highlighted in acknowledged in 39, that there is loss of amenity, loss of light amenity, and massing. So yeah, how you can, the difference might not be significant, but there is loss of light and amenity. So it is under HE2 and H12 refusal. Thank you.
Before we vote on that motion, does anybody want to make any other comment? Or
Yes, Chairman, please. As we're heading towards a decision that's contrary to the recommendation in the report, we do need to tease out from members precisely the reasons for refusal and the harm involved. And we need to be able to put that against the relevant policies in the local plan in order that we can present a defendable reason for refusal, but also so that our decision-making processes are clear and transparent, that in this particular instance the committee wasn't able to accept the officer's recommendation. So I think if we could narrow down the aspects of harm, that would help us in terms of formulating reasons for refusal, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So we've already had mentioned the parking, Councillor Bartlett.
I thought I'd just listed them all, but I'll go through them again. Overlooking, overbearing, incongruous in the street scene, lack of parking, and overbearing and dominant to the adjacent properties.
Chairman, for our benefit, can we be clear the properties that the overbearing impact occurs to? Because in effect we would have to present a case in an appeal. Is the overbearing impact on the gardens at the rear of 22, or this parking area here, this property here? We need to be specific. If we're issuing other decisions, we don't. We clarify the harm and where that harm lies. So I think we need to be clear in our decision making where that harm specifically lies. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one area that is not marked on that map is actually a kind of shed or an office, which is at the back of number 18. It's there as a little box, but it's far bigger than that. If you go back to the overview map, you'll see, there you go, there's quite a large structure there, which is in fact an office.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, and I'd also add to the reasons for objection, NPFF section 12, it says, it's got to improve the area. You'd be hard pushed to say that this is improving the area. So I'd add that to our colleagues' objection, refusal.
Chairman, I was sort of seeking some guidance from members as to particularly which properties are Chair, we're going to have a great deal of difficulty in defending a reason for refusal which throws out a random blanket of harm over the area, and we need to be able to defend that reason by having a specific idea of which properties are adversely affected. So is it number 18? Is it number 22? Is there a loss of privacy to those properties? I'm sorry to be banging this point and in effect trying to get, but we need to try and get at the harm in order that we can show that that's overriding and therefore is sufficient to warrant refusal of the application.
Do you have enough reasons without the overlooking point?
Chairman, I'm entirely satisfied to draw up an overbearing reason as long as we can understand which property it is. I think that's
Councillor Stribby.
Chairman, if members are not familiar with the site, I would suggest that you should defer this application for a site visit. As far as I could see, and I've sat on planning committees for 40 years, this is not close enough to anything to be overbearing. It's adjacent to a parking space, parking area and a shed at the back of a rear garden. There might be an oblique view of the rear of the property from first floor windows at number 41, but it's not particularly close to the other properties in Portfield Close. And I think the council would be on a hiding to nothing on costs if you try to put overbearing or incongruous in the street scene. It's not that dissimilar to the other properties in Portfield Close. I'm sorry, I have no reason to be for it or against it, but I simply cannot see a planning reason to refuse it.
Okay, and the overbearing of the office, Councillor Mel.
My point was, if we're going to move towards this decision, I don't think it's unreasonable that we actually ask the professional officers to shape. We've said why we feel it. So if you want to say, well, but it's that property and that's defensible, that isn't, then why can't we hear from our professional officers? It's why we've said why we think it doesn't fit in terms of our planning policies.
Yes, members. I think you're potentially getting into difficult territory here. You're looking at overlooking, and I think we fully understand some members' concerns about the proposal and looking to refuse the scheme. But when you're looking at overlooking, what is the overlooking which you're concerned with? You've heard from the officers our report. We feel the distances between buildings is acceptable. I'm fully aware that Bournemouth may have different policies in their SPD, which I think is actually a closer relationship in part. You've also heard from officers about the side relationship has obscure glazed windows. So as a matter of fact, the side relationship, there is no overlooking. If we're going to put overlooking as an area of concern, we need to know what those areas of overlooking are and where you're looking at those concerns from. The overbearing, and we've heard about the shed and the office, I don't know whether that shed and office has any side windows in. Can you actually see this building from the office? Or are we just putting something there to say, yes, there's an issue, I don't know the answer to it?
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, if you go to policy H12, 1, 2 and 3 of policy H12 makes it clear why you can reject it. And also policy HE2 gives policies which you can reject on. So if you stick to policies, you should be fine.
Members, policy H12 looks to proposals for infill residential development, but they are appropriate in character and scale. You look at this proposal, it's a two-storey building, similar to other two-storey buildings in the locality. Of design, it's a similar design to the neighbouring properties. Of materials, it's render similar to the other Portfield Close properties. And scale, it's a similar scale. So I'm not quite sure where members are referring to in terms of the policy refers to the reason for refusal, was actually, when you look at the proposal, it seems to refer to the opposite.
Councillor Bartlett.
Okay. In terms of overlooking, the overlooking issue is between number 20 Grove Road East and the proposed development. Both ways, looking either from the back, what will be the back garden at number 20 directly into the upper story of the proposed development, and also the opposite way, looking from the upper story of the proposed development into and directly into the rear garden and rear elevation of number 20. That is my concern in terms of overlooking. In terms of overbearing, the property at, I think it was number 41, is looking across a flat area directly into a new side elevation of a two-storey property. So that makes that bit overbearing. In terms of the visual amenity, I think the visual amenity for the adjoining properties, which is number 16 and number 22, is it? Oh, sorry, my eyesight's failing me. The visual amenity, they're going to have a two-storey house at the bottom of their neighbour's garden, which they're going to be looking at, which they don't have to at the moment. In terms of incongruity in the street scene, when you're looking down from Portfield Close, you'll have a single two-storey dwelling with no properties either side of it, so it will look a little odd because it will be by itself, two stories, and that's what I refer to in terms of its incongruity in the street scene. And that, of course, relates to the build and height of the proposed development. In terms of the parking, it does not provide additional parking. It maintains the same level of parking, but there's no extra provided for this property. Sorry, I can't quote your policy on that. I'm not familiar with your policy on it, but it just seems obvious to me that there's no extra parking being put there. So I think I've probably listed the objections. Does that give you enough detail?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. That's what I was trying to tease out. I'm grateful to Councillor Bartlett for that. Just to clarify, is the loss of parking a highway safety issue or a sort of amenity issue for the occupiers, or both? A combination of both. Do you see that as a loss of amenity for the occupier number 20 and that they don't have off-road parking, or a highway safety issue broadly in Grove Road?
I see that as for the area, because it means that there are additional parking on the streets, and in particular when you take into account albeit they're parked illegally on the pavements at the moment, those vehicles will no longer be able to park there because it'll be an access and they'll be causing an offence because it's a lowered curb there.
So would you include the parking pressure in Portfield Close as well as a harm? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, councillors, can we move to vote? Let's move on the table. All those in favour, will you raise your hand, please? Oh, sorry. All those in favour of the motion, which is refusal for this application.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Any abstentions? Thank you.
Chairman, I'll leave the meeting.
May I have my vote against recorded, because I think there will be costs awarded against the council on this one.
And Chairman, I'm going to leave the meeting now and go to the public.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, moving on to item agenda 5B, which is planning application for 24 St Margaret's Avenue, Christchurch.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a householder application at this property at number 24 St Margaret's Avenue within the red line there. Again, just to give you some idea of the context, this is there's Christchurch Priory, main town centre here, the open area at the Quants down here, Tuckton Bridge bottom left, and the site here opposite the Twynham School. So here's this on the aerial photo, the area within the red line here, and you've heard references in the report to the properties at number 22 St Margaret's and number 70 Soapers Lane. Apologies, there's a couple of typos in the report where it's ended up as Slopers Lane, but it is Soapers Lane. The existing elevations of the property are here, and the alterations relate to the formation of a gable end on this rear wing of the property. So these are the property as existing, and there's a bedroom within this rear wing here. The planning permission, which has already been granted and the council is committed to, forms a gable end at this point here, new dormer on the west elevation here, a window in the rear gable end on the south elevation here, and a new dormer on the east side of the property. And that was granted by the planning committee, subject to a requirement that the two windows highlighted in yellow be obscure glazed. Excuse me. This is the layout of the room in the property concerns this first floor bedroom, and so the, again highlighted in yellow, the two proposed obscure glazed windows here and here. Just taking you some photos of the site. This is from Soapers Lane. So here's the property here, and the intention is to build up a gable end at this point here, and this is number 70 Soapers Lane. This is stood in the back garden of the application site, looking towards number 70 and number 68 Soapers Lane, which does just about, if I point you to this area here, this property does extend further back into its garden. Looking back towards number 70 within the garden of the application site. This is the east elevation of number 24, and there is number 22, and what you can see here is the existing property and its rear conservatory, and then the gable end would be formed from this existing hip here, and the dormer window would sit on this east elevation here. Looking from the front, it'd be very difficult to see the proposals at all, so we're satisfied there's no impact on the street scene. And this is just to show you this relationship here, where the gable end will come out and a new dormer would be constructed on this west elevation. And just to show you, so the axiometric from Google, so bring the rear gable end out here, and the windows on the east elevation at this point here, and in the gable end on the south elevation here, facing towards number 70. So, Chairman, we've gone through the history and the merits of the proposals in your report. We don't have any further updates to add, and our issue is simply that where there was a valid reason for imposing the obscure glaze condition before, our position is that the material relationship with the adjoining properties hasn't changed in the interim in terms of this neighbour here and this neighbour here, and therefore we recommend that the condition be maintained and the application be refused for the reasons in the report, Chairman.
Okay, so we have a request to speak from Peter Hall in his capacity as applicant, and also Mr. David Jones.
Chairman, can Councillor David Jones go first, please? And I'll have the 2 or so minutes left.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee, Mr. Chairman. If I may take a few seconds to introduce myself to those who are fortunate enough not to have had previous experience of me. I am speaking as Councillor Hall's friend, but also I should say that while I am a Christchurch resident, I was chairman of the Christchurch Borough Council's Planning Committee until April the 1st, and I'm now a town councillor and chairman of the Town Council's Planning Committee, so I do have some small experience in these matters. Thank you. Chairman, I've been asked to speak in support of the application, and I am pleased to do so. Now, the crux of this matter, as the report states, is the potential for unacceptable detriment to the amenities of the neighbours in terms of overlooking. And there are really two principles to consider here: reasonableness and consistency. Is it reasonable to impose this condition, as all conditions must be reasonable? Is the committee being consistent with its predecessors? Now, this matter first came to committee on the 18th of March 2018. And in that report then, as it came to committee, no condition was to be imposed for obscure glazing. Indeed, the report stated the proposals will not result in a material harmful loss of privacy. Now, that related to then what was the only one on that report to be considered, the south-facing window. At the committee meeting, though, the Development Management Manager suggested a condition to impose obscure glazing, and it could have been done then at various other points, and we would then have had the written reasons in the report. Now, members will have seen that the proposed south-facing window is some 25 foot from the boundary, and this has been checked by the applicant and by an independent agent, and it is quite a reasonable separation. In fact, there is closer overlooking is possible from other properties, as I believe is in the agent's letter to members that you may have seen. A point that I would ask you to consider is that although this application has been in the public domain now since for 18 months, no neighbour has objected. And of course the maxim is silence gives consent. The neighbours haven't said this is horrible, we don't want it. So in that case, I think the people most involved are happy. Chairman, there's also the position about the south-facing window and consistency. Further down the road at number 16 and 16A, an application was put forward and approved which said the roof windows in the north and the south roof slopes, with the exception of the fire escape window, shall be obscure glazed and fixture. Okay, so the fire escape window did not need to be obscure glazed. The officers have been told by the applicant that this is intended to be a fire escape window. Chairman, thank you for that. I'll now hand over to Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'd just like to bring in some bullet points, because I think it's very important that we get the actual exact what happened. The team leader, David Hodges, telephoned me late in May and stated, as I'm a councillor, the application had to go to the planning committee. I asked him who would make the final decision, and he replied, Case Officer Kim Bowditch. During the training day on the 29th of May, I called in to see the case officer regarding my application. She said she'd be doing a report shortly and assured me I had no worries, and that was her words, because the development at 16 and 16A St Margaret has set a precedent. and she could see no reason why my application would not be recommended for approval, especially as other windows in the area overlook this property and are nearer than my development. On Monday the 3rd of June, the case officer Kim Bowditch telephoned me and stated very clearly she'd be supporting my clear glazing the south-facing window as a fire escape, and other windows in the area were more overlooking this property. She was not quite sure about the east-facing window until I pointed out on 2 separate occasions she was happy to have clear glazing installed. And what I would like to just say briefly, Chairman, is that the planning conditions, according to the planning conditions that we have, should be reasonable, and in my opinion, condition 4 is certainly not, and therefore request it's removed and clear glazing approved. And that is a letter they received from the architect who's been involved from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Is Councillor Cox here? No. Okay then, members. Does anybody want to kick off? Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I visited this property because I'm not familiar with the area. Looking at the south elevation, all the other windows, set a few feet further back, of course, in the main roof, are clear glazed. Bedroom windows with a normal sill height are not usually a problem for overlooking. I have a totally different view when you have floor-to-ceiling windows and somebody can sit in the room or sit in the bed and gaze down upon their neighbours. But this is not that aspect. It's like every other bedroom window in an urban area where you can open the window, you can glance into your neighbour's garden, but there is no significant or material overlooking. With no objections, I don't see any reason to refuse it.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anybody? Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. In between the rain showers this morning, I also went to visit the property. I was able to get into the side of number 70 along with,
Me.
Is Councillor here? We both observed it very, very well from all different angles, at best what we could see. And at that particular time, we could, well, certainly I could not see any reasons why they were asking for obscure glazing, because the windows in there, as already said by Councillor Stribley, are quite large. They would, in my opinion, provide exactly the same overlooking as the new windows would. So I also see no reason for this one to be refused.
Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Could the officer just confirm the relevant planning history under section 4? So going back, initially the granting in April 2018, and then there's obviously been some alterations, but just a bit confused about the entry as 11th of December and then the entry at 21st of December. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the original planning permission for the, in effect, the gable end, on the better description, is the 18254 application. Now, when that particular application came in, there was no dormer proposed on this east elevation. So the proposal for the amendment to the east elevation is included on the 180951 application. So that introduced actually a larger dormer to that east elevation. The applicant then applied under the 182189 application for a non-material amendment, which reduced the size of this dormer on here, and also altered the window positions on the west-facing dormer, and that was granted because that was a non-material change to the permission that they had. But as a NMA type application, that doesn't change the planning conditions that were attached to the 180951 permission, which included the obscure glazing. And then the most recent application was the certificate of lawfulness, which was asking us a question about whether the works could be done as permitted development, but they couldn't in this particular instance due to the number of alterations that have taken place to the property before, and also because it is not permitted development to put in a clear glazed window on the side elevation, because that's restricted by the PD regs.
So just clarified, so the granting in 11 December, in effect, was the west elevation extended window with no condition about obscuring, and similarly in the south elevation, it was granted with no obscuring. It was just going back with lawfulness, was it came back to committee and then they did ask for obscuring. Is that correct?
No, sorry, apologies if my explanation was unclear. The planning permission, which is 180951, that's a planning permission for the works, and that imposed the condition requiring the obscure glazing. The 182189 is a non-material amendment to that planning permission, and that makes a non-material change, i.e. a change which doesn't require a further planning application, which reduced the size of this dormer and the proposed windows in either side. But the approval of that does not affect the conditions that were imposed on the earlier planning permission, because you can't do that through a non-material amendment.
That was made by the Christchurch Borough Council Planning.
Yes, all of the applications in the planning history section at 4 were made by the former CBC because of the status of the applicant as a ward member at the time.
And since that application, there's been no material change or no policy change?
No, Chairman, that's as set out in the report, yeah.
Thanks. I think Councillor Stribling made an excellent point that the existing windows on the south elevation are effectively overlooking. What is different about the proposed window that causes overlooking? We'd like to go back to the last subject that we dealt with, and perhaps you could explain to us specifically what the nature of the objection for the overlooking actually is. All it says in the report basically is it was refused. It was a condition of the last approval. So, you know, what actually is the objection in terms of overlooking?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So what the policy HE2 requires is that we should minimise the impacts on the living conditions of neighbouring properties. So you have a bedroom in this part of the dwelling here, which is served adequately by a west-facing dormer, which doesn't cause us any issues in terms of privacy, looking out with an aspect there, which will provide adequate light, aspect, ventilation for the room concerned. So, is there an overriding need to put in a window here which is 6 metres to the boundary? And I'm conscious that the previous decision of this committee was to refuse a planning application on loss of overlooking for a bedroom window that's 18 metres away. And then we've also got a bedroom window on this side elevation, which is, as you see in the report, in effect a metre from the boundary. And there is a conservatory here. So the issue for us is the proximity. And then the possible looking, in effect, well, not possible, but we consider a direct overlooking issue into those neighbouring dwellings.
Councillor Kelsey.
The application to remove this condition, was it a full application and therefore notified to neighbours with notices up in streets, etc.?
Yes, Chair, because this is a variation of a condition. It's a full planning permission, and it goes through the ordinary publicity procedures under CBC's former statement of community involvement. So that involves letters to directly adjoining properties and a site notice on site.
Thank you. And following on from that, did you get any responses?
No, we haven't. It's the Councillor Hall's position is correct. We haven't had objections.
So would that not tell you that the neighbours are not objecting to that and that they do not see the fact that they will be overlooked in any way?
Chairman, that's not the test. The test is what's in the policy, because that's a starting point. So whether a neighbour on a personal level chooses to object doesn't mean that we disregard the impacts of their property. And often you will find that people will approach us to say they didn't know about an application, they didn't comment on it, and they want to know that we took into account the impact on their property. And the short answer is the decisions don't go out of the door unless we show that we have done that and given adequate regard to neighbours' amenity, whether they object to a scheme or not.
And of course, we have to look at future residents as well, I guess. But yeah. Councillor Poiverdine, is that?
Thank you. Usually, when we have an application, we either accept or reject. This seems to me to have two clear, separate sections. And to my mind, my judgment on one is different from my judgment on the other. So, are we committed to considering them as a joint effort, or can we separate them?
Separating the two windows, so we have a condition for one to be glazed and not the other.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, because the applicant's asked to remove that condition. In considering the merits, we could vary that condition. I'm presuming where you're going, in that you allow a clear glazing in the south elevation, but then obscure glaze the east elevation.
That would be my inclination, certainly.
Councillor Miller.
I wasn't going to speak because I thought we were all quite of the same view that, you know, there is no, you know, people, the next door neighbours have been, you know, sent letters. They will be aware that this is happening. You know, I think the officer stated we have concern. Yes, but the people we have a concern for don't have a concern. So I'm very, very, I'm very keen on this to move forward and accept it as it is. And I don't feel the need to break it into two applications.
Councillor Parverdine, did you want to put a motion to that effect, or?
Yes, I'd like to move that we accept the removal of condition 4 on the rear-facing south elevation windows, but maintain it on the east elevation window.
And is there a seconder for that motion?
That's not allowed, sorry.
Yeah.
Or not just allow what it says. Could we ask what's involved in that note, please?
Is that note have anything to do with this application?
It's irrelevant, Chairman.
It is, but I'm not a decision maker, and I'm not going to tell anybody what it says. So,
well, I'm sorry, but we are entitled to know. Councillor Jones has just made a great faux pas in doing that, and as a planning board, we're entitled to know what that note consists of.
Yeah, okay. Shall I, Mr. Chair? Oh, sorry. I understand that the applicant would accept a split decision.
It's not relevant for the applicant to accept it or not, really. I don't think. But,
It's certainly not relevant for a member of the audience to be passing notes to the planning board.
Agreed.
Can members disregard the contents of that note? Thank you. Councillor Stribley.
Chairman, I would propose the recommendation is put and we either vote for it or against it.
There was no seconder for your motion, was there, Councillor Parverdine? No. So let's vote on that motion then.
Just to be clear, so it's to effectively reverse the officer's decision and to approve the change of. So that would be a yes.
A yes to reverse the decision and have clear glazing in both sets of windows. Do we have a seconder for that?
Yes. Chairman, before we vote, can we just, for the sake of the record, clarify the reasons again for the overturn? Works both ways, so we need to, so the decision-making process is opaque. Sorry, it's clear. Yeah, I've got opaque glazing on the bridge. Yeah. Can we just clarify that I don't want to put words in members' back, but in effect they're not satisfied there's a significant loss of privacy to the adjoining parties. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so those in favour of that? Oh, Councillor Henry, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just uncomfortable that we've heard there's no material changes to the previous application where the committee sat. and I'd be more comfortable with the split decision, but I couldn't support it to override a committee on the full basis. Thanks.
Chairman, we have a proposal to grant the application for clear glazing on both windows, so let's just see how it goes.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. There's, the only concern I have is that there is no policy change, there is no material change. Christchurch Borough Council made their decision. Is there an opportunity to review that once the building's in situ, to look at the over?
Yes, members, there is an opportunity. I think that's normally the point at which an applicant will apply to vary a condition. As and when the development is up, there would be a material change in circumstance. Members, officers could then stand in the window and look to see if the reality of the concerns for that condition ring true. At this point of time, officers' advice is that there has been no material change in circumstance. Yes, we have a new group of members, in fact a new authority, but the decisions of that authority remain unchanged.
Thank you. So if members could just bear that in mind when they cast their vote. So, everyone clear what we're voting for? So, those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Any abstentions? Thank you. I should say, so that motion is carried. Okay, members, so that brings us to the close of the meeting. There are no other items, other than to ask you to stay back for a moment or two to some housekeeping issues with the officers. Thank you.